Hey.
How is it going, everyone? I hope you're all doing very well. Obviously, my face isn't really doing too well today. So it's good to have you all here. Um, Today we'll be discussing several interesting topics, one of which is in regards to a city or actually several cities in the African continent in which, due to your skin color, you may not be allowed to live in there. And we'll also be talking about um, a city in Zimbabwe, for example, in which an African man was called a foreigner in his own country and wasn't allowed to dine in a restaurant. All of this and more we will be talking about in this live stream. And here with me is GA Sola from the YouTube channel GA Sola. GA Sola is amongst my favorite YouTubers. I love his work. If you guys are watching this video as a replay, pause this video right now and head over to YouTube and type in GA Sola and subscribe to his channel. He makes really, really amazing work. I found him while I was doing research in regards to a video that I was working on, and I enjoy his work, his animation, the amount of effort that he puts into it. If you enjoy my videos, you'll definitely enjoy his work. So, um, Jay Sola, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself also here, or if I've done a good job.
No, you've done a fantastic job. Yeah, so I'm uh, I'm GA Sola, and maybe I should just mention the series, the reason why I created the racism series. It's the first thing that I posted on my channel as of yet, a series on racism in the country I currently reside in, South Africa. And but I'm not South African myself. I wasn't born here. Um, you see, I personally grew up in a very multiracial environment. You see, and it was an area where I didn't see race or color or anything like that. I guess I found inspiration because of the current climate of things nowadays, and I wanted to because very often, especially from America on your side, I hear there are many YouTubers and people that come out discussing the things that are happening in South Africa or speaking about races in general. And very often, you will people will take show only one side or another side to the world. And I'm not righteous or anything or trying to be humble by being. I don't even consider it the middle ground. What I do consider it is just showing the facts. As long as people have the facts about what's really going on, then they can make up their mind. If they want to be racist, they can be racist. But the important thing is for them to at least have both sides of the issue. So it's not a thing about trying to be uh, in the middle ground. It's just to show all the facts in its proper context. So yeah, but yeah, please, if you're interested, my channel is there. You can check it out for yourself. We'll be discussing some other stuff in this video.
So, in the series that you made, one of the things that you talked about is affirmative action. And for those who are not aware, affirmative action is a system put in place to combat um, consequences of history. So, for example, due to the fact that the majority of the dark-skinned African population have been marginalized in South Africa, they weren't allowed to work in certain places or live in certain places. So affirmative action says, because you guys went through this and it still affects you today, we'll do these certain things to try to combat the effects of that. One of which is so, for example, if someone is working, right, if someone is trying to apply for a job, um, one of the things that they'll look at is your skin color. So they can prioritize your skin color over your qualification. And one thing that I wanted to ask you is, should affirmative action be prioritized over qualification?
That's the thing. It's generally the answer is no, because for a number of very reasonable and sometimes obvious reasons, you can compare affirmative action. But before, let me just say one thing about affirmative action in general. As you described, it is to rectify some disadvantages for certain groups of the past, whether it be women or races or sexual orientation, some cases. That's what affirmative action is. The difference, however, is that somebody can correct me if they know of another case, but South Africa is the literal exception to affirmative action in the entire world. It is the only case where affirmative action is applied for the majority of the population of the country, not the minority. I was actually on the Wikipedia page for affirmative action, and on it, it was actually referring to mostly minorities of a certain place. I think maybe it was written in an American context, but that's what they refer to. You know, that affirmative action is usually for minorities. In South Africa, it's the exact opposite. It's literally for today. I think it's about more than 40 million people. While as the people who were previously privileged or advantaged in the past were whites, who only represent now just a bit over 9% of the population. Now, the problem is that to answer your question, if we do prioritize the skin color without particularly looking at the merits or the qualifications of the person, it will result in a poor quality workforce. In the United Kingdom, for example, there is affirmative action, although it's very strict that it has to be based on merit. So what they do is they basically take the cream of the crop of the people that are disadvantaged. So if, for example, blacks are disadvantaged over there, then what they will do is they'll take the blacks who actually do qualify for the job. I think it's a pretty good approach because it will not impact the quality of the people that are in there. The problem, however, is that there is a reality in South Africa, and that is the educational reality. Even during apartheid times, the schools that blacks attended were always of poorer quality than the white schools. Although they did have some schools you could go and get a qualification, you could go to university, though it was very difficult, and especially financially. I remember that the apartheid regime made made it very strenuous for blacks to earn a proper income. They earned much less than their white counterparts. And so because of that and also other reasons, and one of the main reasons also is that generally what Africans would do is that they would go to school, even if they make it to varsity, that'll be fine. But then what they will do is that in between, most of them would end up dropping out. They wouldn't even make it to the end of high school because they had to go back to work. Even till today, this ideology among the black communities all over the world, I think even in America, is that, they don't see they cannot actually see the prioritized education, book learning, when they could be working to get a job as a breadwinner for the family. That's what they see at the moment, you see. And it's not because they just don't want to invest or anything. It's because there is a certain reality. They need to live and they need to put food on the table. So imagine, especially in South Africa, and I can attest to this because I am a student, that it takes a lot of time for young people to get jobs here. And you study for a long time just to find yourselves in what we call the NEET variety of people. In other words, people who are not in training, not in studying, and jobless. Those type of people are now becoming a very big amounts of people because they've studied and yet they cannot find any jobs because the jobs are either being withheld or the companies are just cannot afford to hire new people. And most of the time they need experience. So you need to have experience to get experience. So it's a very interesting paradox. And so these are just the educational thing. That brings now for affirmative action, because in South Africa, it does not work like in the United Kingdom. What they do is that they really do look at the skin color before the qualification. However, the system what we have over here is called Black Economic Empowerment, BEE. And with that, I must add, just as I've mentioned in one of my videos, that very few Black South Africans actually do benefit from this. And that is something that must be mentioned. You may think that, oh, after 27 years of affirmative action, they should have at least made a dent. And yes, there are very wealthy Black South Africans in society, but still, 61% of the adult South African population, according to a report from, I think, 2015, are still living in poverty, in the upper bound, below the upper bound poverty line, which is very bad. That's a lot of people. 61% of Blacks, that's literally millions of people. And I can see this. You can see this when you go out. And so they haven't really made a dent for everybody. Usually, to qualify for BE, you need to be politically connected. You need to have people on the inside, usually in the ANC, or I don't know, favors or whatever. Or if you're lucky, you might be able to get something good for yourself. But usually, you need to have something to get something. So no, it is a real problem, because they're trying to speed up the process by getting Black people in the workforce, because they want to see results now.
Yeah.
But by rushing this process and just putting anybody in there without really checking their qualifications, you're putting people who cannot really do the job as well as others can. I know that we're probably going to get to this later, but that does not necessarily mean that they're really taking a lot of white people's jobs. I know that some sources, I have even seen one report where some white people were complaining that it's because of BE that they don't have jobs. That may be true for some, but not really for the majority. People who are unemployed, it's very rarely because they replaced their jobs, white people's jobs, with Black people. It does happen, but on very rare occasions.
I see. Wow, that is very interesting. One of the things that I also wanted to ask is there was a part of the series where you talked about colorism. And I found it really interesting because it put a lot of things into perspective, and it helped me to also visualize amongst our biggest issues as a people. And it also it gives an answer to um, one of the questions that we all have in mind, but we just don't know how to phrase. And that is a scenario where one can say, Black people don't support each other, or a Black person will treat someone else better than himself. And you gave an example of the Clark's doll experiment. I was wondering if you can go a little bit more in depth in regards to that.
Right. The Clark-Starr experiment was developed by psychiatrists, a man named, now I forgot his first name, but his name was Clark, with his wife, who were both American psychiatrists in the 1940s. What they did was they tested, first, actually, I think that the test that they did before the doll experiment was the coloring test, where what would happen is that they got a few children between the ages of 5 to 7 years old, and they made them color certain drawings, a number of them. To save time, I won't go into the details, but they made them color a number of drawings. One of the drawings that they made them color were of the gender that they are. So if they're a boy, they would color the boy. And if they're a girl, they would have to color the girl the race that they would want the I explained it wrong. If they were a boy, for example, they would color them their own race, okay? But for the opposite gender, they would color that the race that they would want that gender to be, for whatever reason. As a 5 or 7-year-old, whatever reason comes to mind. Their results were interesting. What they found was that when it came to coloring themselves, the children between 5 and 7 always colored themselves lighter than what they actually were. So if they were really dark skinned, they would, be color themselves chocolate or caramel or something like that. And then when it came to coloring the opposite gender, some did color them the same race as them, but then 56% colored them white, like not even lighter brown or whatever, they were just white. And the other percentage were weird colors, children, sometimes purple, green, they would, have all those. But that's what they did. That was the first test. And it was to show that it was already showing signs that, the perception that they had on dark skin was not a very good one. It's not something that they wanted.
Yeah.
The Clark's doll experiment, however, was one that I included in my video. You can go on YouTube, you can check the video for yourself, and the original video from the 40s, wherein they placed two dolls. One was a white doll, one was a dark-skinned black doll, and they asked them a number of questions. They knew nothing about it. They identified which one was the white doll, which one was the black doll, and they were asked questions on uh, so along the lines of which one is the bad doll, which one is the ugly doll, which one is the nice doll. The positive questions were always for the vast majority of cases, maybe even 100% in some cases, for the positive, it always went to the white doll. The black doll was always the one that was considered bad. The last question that they would ask in these experiments was which doll resembles you? And they would always choose, honestly, that I do look like the black doll that I said is ugly and nasty and bad and everything. It brought up actually, this test brought up a number of things for psychiatry in the psychiatry industry, wherein it tested people's self-esteem, the ideas that people have because of systems like segregation, wherein you have people will see the other races or other type of people through a particular lens. In America, and in most cases, white people are portrayed, at least, in a better a lens, especially back in those days. Today it's a bit different, I know, but back in those days. And for them to look around their own society and the reality, not just what's on TV. I mean, on TV, they would also show gangsters and black people not always being subservient and stuff. But even in their own reality, they knew that it was true. And so you wouldn't want to be the loser. If in the child's mind, their reality, they kind of fantasize a reality where they were someone else, that they were the race that was superior, that was seen to as superior. Because no one wants to be a loser. And of course, a child will be honest. And so to rectify these things, people would now take different decisions. However, I should note that this test has been repeated over and over the years to see if there's been any progress. And I recently saw another test where they tested this time white kids, and they put them there. The same results for the majority. However, it was interesting that one kid, when choosing which doll he thought was the prettiest among the white or black doll, he chose the black doll. And he was a white boy, while the other white girls always chose the lighter skin thing and everything. It was interesting to me because when people interact and everything, it's not just about, I mentioned this in one of my videos, it's also about preference. Usually, sometimes people are attracted to what's exotic as well. It's not just about the dark skin. For example, some white people, what they call jungle fever. I don't know if people call that a derogatory thing, but what they have is sometimes you have people of different races who are just attracted to people of other races just because they're a different race, regardless of whether they're light or dark. So, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Because it's different from
because it's different. Yeah, and people have their fetishes and people have their preferences. So the only problem, and I emphasized this in the video as well, was that it only becomes a problem when people start to discriminate each other based on whether they're light or dark. And I know that it is something that is pretty subliminal. Like when you see, sometimes it depends. Sometimes when people see a dark-skinned person or a black person, they may already have preconceptions about that person. And nobody can really change that. It can only be changed through influence and maybe getting to know more people of that sort. But in reality, I think that the emphasis should be placed on people just treating each other well, not necessarily trying to force people, as some movies nowadays and some of political stances will try to make it seem that we need to force people to like Black people, or we need to force people to stop hating each other or whatever. You can never force a person to like or dislike something. You can only influence them. But you can, and the best way to do that is to maybe teach them, education, have people interact with each other. So yeah, segregation did have effects on people, and the Clarke-Darrow experiment touched on that.
So in your video, I remember one part an animation in which they were in a restaurant and the
Oh
lady,
yeah,
the waiter, she served a cup of coffee to the Caucasian gentleman and threw uh,
the
and
glass in the
the
yeah.
other gentleman. And well, I guess, based on the Clarke-Darrow experiment, it does have a subliminal impact on us. And could you say that that could be a reason as to why, we hear a lot of times Black people don't support each other? Just I hear that very often, and I was wondering if that can be one of the reasons that attribute to such statements.
So just to clarify, when you say Black people don't support each other, are you saying like they show contempt for each other, or they prefer other races, or what are you specifically?
I'm still yet to dissect what that means, because I
Mm.
just hear it, tossed here and there. But I do I do believe in a way that that also is probably in reference to contempt and probably subservience also.
Well, okay, because it is quite a statement. I don't hear it very often, but I can only imagine that Pan-Africanists do say that quite a lot. And the Pan-Africanists, at least that I know of in South Africa anyway, the extreme ones anyway, not the moderate ones, they sometimes say that just to show that, things like black on black crime, or that, when a person, even among, and this is actually true, so it's actually good that you brought this up, even in a case where, for example, you have a Black teacher and you have a white teacher, it's just going to happen among the Black students, even amongst the black students, that they will usually think that the white teacher knows more than the Black student, or will at least trust the white teacher more. These are just realities, all right? I'm not. I know that sometimes people may think that I say we talk about these things because we want to frown upon white people or other races. That's not why I'm doing this. I'm just showing the reality of what the perception that people have against each other, even in the same race. What it means afterwards, it doesn't mean anything. You shouldn't go and mistreat white people just because people are treating them with preference. But it is the reality, and that is one sense, the way that Black people don't really. But what I've seen, however, because I've been in a number of societies, or environments and communities, and what I've seen is that actually that happens in every race. You will find white people that don't support each other. In South Africa, for example, you should see how many divisions there are among the Afrikaners, the white Afrikaners. They are. It's pretty bad. Like
Really?
what happens is that I think the biggest division is between the rich and the poor, the Afrikaners. They don't usually, whenever, and they usually sometimes it leaks out. But what happens is that sometimes when an Afrikaner has quite a lot of means, and he's not helping out his fellow Afrikaners, you'll find other Afrikaners, but saying that you could be doing something to help the Afrikaner race. Chinese people as well, every race. I mean, for example, in South America has the most dangerous towns in the entire world, and yet most of the people there are South Americans. So black on black crime is common in every other race as well. There's white on white crime, there's Chinese on Chinese crime, there's everything, and there's also contempt for such things. It's no different with Black people, in my opinion. The statement
Yeah,
of Black people don't support
I'm
it.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that because like that's a video that I wanted to work on and I've been doing a lot of research towards. And I did a poll on my YouTube channel and I asked the
Okay.
question, do Africans, quote unquote, black people support each other? And
Mm.
out of 341 people that voted, 32% voted yes, that we do support each other, and a vast majority, 68%, voted no, that we don't support each other. And a lot of, I'm not gonna go through the comments, but a lot of the
Mm.
comments was, heavily opinionated towards no, that we don't support each other. And as you said, it's something that like you witness in every other race, but considering that we're mostly amongst each other, we do feel the impact of the
Mm.
few minority that don't support each other. But in my opinion, I feel like we're the most supportive of each other, of any ethnic group. Like we have
Mm.
something that no other ethnic group in the world has, and that is fictive kingship. If I hope I said that correctly, and that is a scenario where if Usain Bolt is the fastest person in the world, that reflects on me
Mm.
positively, and
Mm.
I take pride in that. Also, Obama became president. Everyone in
Mm.
Africa celebrated along with him, but there's
Yeah.
no other ethnic group in the world that takes pride in that. And I also see it in like the YouTube community also with various channels. For example, Adiola with Keeping It Real, that mentions various success stories of different
Mm.
Africans or melanated people across the world just celebrating their victories. And it's a scenario where someone's victory, I take it personal, like it
Mm.
uplifts me in a way. Yeah, I was really glad that you mentioned that. Another question that I wanted to ask is in regards to darn, what's the word I'm
Orania?
looking. Yeah, we'll get to that in a second.
Oh, we'll get to that. Okay.
It's in regards to if affirmative action can combat subservience. So
Oh, yeah.
subservience being so having a teacher, for example, who is Caucasian, we look to them, looking up to them, in a way. Having a boss who's Caucasian, we look up to
Mm.
them, like they have sort of an authority.
Mm.
So I wanted to know, considering that affirmative action could place someone of a darker hue in those positions of authority, for also like
Mm.
the younger generations to see sort of like a replica of themselves in those
Mm.
positions of authority, do you think that in a way affirmative action could help to combat subservience? I
Aha.
don't know
Now
if
that is. Mhm.
subservience correctly also. I basically heard it in your video and went to
Yes, and I
look up
understand
what
what
it
you mean.
was.
Yeah. No, no, no. I understand what you mean. Um, that is actually a very interesting question because the thing is that it is already happening. There are a number of blacks, South African blacks, who are in positions of authority, and it's like uh, even the ministers and so on and so forth. The only problem, however, is that the ones who are what they like to call black excellence, right? The ones who are doing a good job, right? They are definitely present. They do exist, and so on and so forth. The only problem, however, is that most of the things that we see in terms of the ones who are in, especially in the government, so I should probably mention the government mostly, is that right now the South African government, or right now, not right now, but ever since even the early 2000s, the South African government has been incredibly corrupt. Um, the ANC government. They mismanagement of funds, and more especially is the real problem. which is why I even mentioned that right now there's a big to do with Jacob Zuma, the former president. They're trying to get him, send him to jail for showing contempt in court. But the whole thing is because of mismanagement. He allegedly used taxpayers' funds to build a house for himself in his home. Yeah, it really happened. It was quite a thing. There were a lot of comics and stuff during the time. But basically, yeah, and so when people now see Black people in authority, yeah, we have a Black government, we have Black faces to represent us and everything. And they realize that, first of all, that Black government does not care about them. And they really don't. They don't care about the poor. They don't care about, they're incompetent in many regards. I was watching the state capture inquiry a few months ago, where the Minister of Human Settlements, I think, and Informal Settlements or something, didn't even know about a specific act in the Constitution that was very important, because now they went and built a number of houses or something in an area where I don't think they were supposed to. And then when they questioned him about it and told him that there is this law that exists about that, he said, well, I don't know about that. And it's like, you're the Minister of Human Settlements, how do you not know? So people are now used to the fact that they have the Black people that are in positions of authority in South Africa are incompetent. And that is not true for every Black person and every Black South African. There are definitely very qualified academics, intellectuals, South African Blacks and other Blacks all over the world. But the reality is that we do not see them, and they are clearly not in the majority of cases. And so the perception still remains, because now they feel, and in society, I can speak of my experience, that when, for example, the whites and the Afrikaners tend to be doing certain things, or when the apartheid government was there, the country's economy was a lot better. But the situation for the Blacks was very bad, you see. So now when people say, okay, the situation for the Blacks was bad, yeah, sure, it was. But at least they knew how to run the country. So that's their point. And then the idea that forms in the minds of all Black South Africans and people everywhere is that, Blacks whites just know how to do things a lot better. It's not inherently true. It has its reasons, if I may, just for a moment, explain that the ANC government, we can agree that they did do a fantastic job in the struggle to bring the end of apartheid. Everybody thanks them for that. But if they really did care about the country, they would have placed the right people in the right places, positions in cabinet to run the proper things. But instead, what they did was they just placed members who were part of the struggle. So you fought, you fought in the struggle. You threw a bunch of bombs. You went to jail and everything, and that suddenly gives you all the knowledge about how to run the educational system. I think not. You learn these things through learning and studying and education. There were people that could have done that, but they did not put them in those positions. They kept the power to themselves. And now we can see that with the mismanagement of funds, and the country is going into chaos. And so those are the reasons. There are reasons why it's like that. It's not that Black people are stupid. It's not that Black people are incompetent. But that is the reality that we're facing today. So to answer the of if affirmative action will kind of eliminate, or at least help the subservience problem, in some sense it actually does. In some cases, seeing that, hey, yeah, we're actually equal to other races, getting rid of the stereotypes of Black bad and Black incompetent, white good and white competent. It does help. It's just, if you put somebody in a position of authority and they do a terrible job, it actually makes it even worse, because now you're basically saying that, yeah, you see, we put the Blacks in position and they're just proving our point that they're not doing a good job. If we could put the right people there, Black people would do fine. And we have seen many examples throughout history of Black people doing fantastic things. So these conceptions in our minds, hopefully they will eliminate. But I'm not sure if affirmative action will do the job alone. I don't think so.
So, in the series, you mentioned an alarming statistic, which is 72% of land is owned by
Oh
the
yeah.
Caucasian population, but only 4% owned by the majority, which is the indigenous African American population. Like,
African. We're not in America.
my, I'm sorry. The
That's cool.
indigenous population. And like, first of all, like, how is this possible? And should there be land redistribution? And if there should be land redistribution, should that come with compensation?
Right. Again, a fantastic question. The thing is that, first of all, I should know that those statistics have been contested and disputed by a few groups. The 72% that is claimed, it comes from the Land Audit Report of 2017, issued by the government. And the 72% that they mentioned that whites own, people such as groups like AfriForum have contested that it's actually 72% out of 30%. The land actually belongs to the government. And what happens is the government owns these lands, it's state owned. And what they want to do, and I mentioned this in one of the videos, is what they do is they keep hold of the land, the government, they keep hold of the land, and they lease it out to people, anybody, black people, but mostly they lease it out to these big corporations because those ones are the most profitable and bring in the most money for the economy. Remember that South Africa produces a lot of the things that even other countries like the Americas eat, mangoes and stuff like that. Now the thing is that they do still, but even when the statistics that we still see, yeah, and the whites still do own most of the land. In reality, the statistics that have been shown that are more moderate is that blacks actually own 32% of the land or something like that, which is still pretty low. And now the land question, unfortunately, I don't think we'll be able to go into too much detail because of time today, but the land question is a very complicated one because I made a video if you want more details, the viewer. But what happens is that the argument today from the people that are the politicians anyway, is that the land was stolen. All right, it's the ownership of the land on the whites is illegitimate, and they're placing this because of the history of the Europeans arriving in South Africa and so on and so forth. But then now, when they bring that up, the whites bring up the fact that before that happened, there was the Bantu expansion, and the Africans from higher up in Africa came down and took the land from the Khoisan. So if we're going to base it on history, then you're supposed to, I guess the rightful owners will have to be the Khoi, and right now they're a minority, and most of them unfortunately are in jail. The Khoisan, the Khaleds in South Africa make up the largest prison population in the country. So people
Really?
are not really going to, yeah, they do. People are not really going to give them the country anytime soon. But then, but the real injustice was in 1913, sorry, with the Natives Land Act. What happened was that it was an act that prevented purchasing and selling of land between different races, between blacks and whites, or specifically. And good afternoon, the person who said good afternoon. Well, it's good night here. It's actually 8 p.m. on my side, but yeah. And so the Native Land Act stopped the people from doing that. And so basically now the real problem is that since the land that many of the whites have today was acquired through a disadvantageous level playing field, we need land reform. And land reform has been ongoing. And there are even laws that existed even during apartheid times to expropriate land for different reasons if it's necessary. Those laws exist. The reason why, so now the question is, okay, why isn't the government using those laws? Why aren't they giving people their land if that's the case? First of all, the process, they have given some land. There has been some redistribution, but up till now, still less than 10% of the land has been redistributed to the blacks in the country, which is a pretty, which means no movement. The real reason for this, however, is because the government wishes to keep the ownership of the land to themselves, to lease it out to the people. I'm not saying that this is because they're selfish. It's because they want to have control. If they don't have, the other alternative would be that you just dish out the land. Of course, there have been many alternatives, which is why I said we can't go into detail today. But other alternatives is more of communism, especially from there should be no private ownership of the land. The land should just belong to the people, and someone will just regulate how they who gets what and everything, which is going to cause a complete mess if the land just belongs to everybody. So the other side says that no, we should privatize the land to certain people, but but then now we just need to go through it in a steady process. That process is unfortunately taking too long for certain people. So that's what it results in some really angry people taking drastic measures. And that's what results in farm attacks. Because the whites who are now there, people are now starting to take the land by force. And they're taking the matters into their own hands since the government is not really doing anything on a fast scale. So it's a very complicated situation. But yes, it is true that whites still own most of the South Africa's land. And in the past, it was even worse. You know the state of Florida in the United States, right? Yeah. During apartheid, blacks were confined. 15 million, because at that time it was 15 million blacks, were confined to the portion of South Africa that was about just a bit bigger than the state of Florida. 15 million people living in that confined space, while the minority whites were about only 3 million at the time, were allowed to use the rest of the land. And since they were not allowed to buy any land from the whites, it was basically being a prisoner in your own country.
Yeah.
So these injustices obviously need to be resolved. But now things are a bit different. If we give the land to just anybody, especially agricultural land, it does threaten food security. And so they try to go through it in a very steady manner. But then the problem is that steady manner for many people is taking too long, and that's why people are taking action on their own.
I'm glad that you mentioned the farm attacks. One of the portion of your video showed a little snippet of that being discussed on Fox News, and I wanted to get like the perception that may have on various medias around the world. How did the audience receive, or how were the farm attacks portrayed in the media?
Oh yeah. So first of all, every single person, especially from South Africa, whenever they go to another or they have an opportunity to speak to the United States, which will basically reach the rest of the world, they will always say things from their perspective. So the conservative whites will say things from their perspective of what's going on in South Africa. You find a black from the township, he'll talk about his situation and everything. Everybody will only give their side of the story, and that's only natural, So the snippet that I used was from Ernst Roets. He's the, I think, deputy CEO of AfriForum. What he's saying is that, and it's true that they are killing white farmers quite a lot. Sometimes there are 100 of them that die a year. And it's pretty horrible. That it's not like just shooting or whatever. It's sometimes like torture, and it's really horrible stuff. And the thing about it is that most people, or at least many people, especially black people in South Africa, don't particularly care for a number of reasons. And I've discussed this. One of the reasons is because they first of all believe that they kind of deserve it. They should just give the land back to the blacks and everything, and they wouldn't be killed if they just gave the land back. And I've also discussed the fact that European Afrikaners can't just go back to Europe. They don't have a home in Europe. They can't go back to the Netherlands. If they do, they'll have to start from scratch just like anybody else. They're not like the English or the Germans or the Italians or the Portuguese who are here. Many of those South Africans do have dual citizenship. They can go back, but not Afrikaners. They've been here for too long for them to have any ties with Europe. But they even cut off the ties centuries ago. So the image that they give, to answer your question, the perception that they give is a bit one-sided, I must admit, because even Lawrence Southern's documentary on farmlands, I watched the documentary, it was just giving it from the perspective of the white farmers. And yeah, it was actually quite factual. But when you only give it from the perspective of the white farmers, it has a negative effect on the whole situation, because what happens is it makes it seem like Black people are just randomly going around killing
Yeah.
farmers and everything. And then that's what leads to people to believe in the white genocide theory, where they're trying, South Africans are trying to eliminate the white population in South Africa. Which is really, if people have evidence for this, they should bring it forward. But up till now, it's always speculation. For example, in 1 year, I think in 2019, only 49 white farmers were actually killed because of farm attacks. So I don't know how that is a genocide when there are literally 4 million plus white people in South Africa. It's not a genocide. It's just white farmers being killed. But then now, if you need to show it from the other side as well, the reason why these people are attacking the farmers is because they really do believe that their ownership of the land is illegitimate. So that's why most of the time they don't even steal anything. They just get there, they kill the fathers, sometimes they kill the children, they torture them, they beat them up, and then they leave. They don't even take, sometimes they'll take some money or something, and then they'll go. That's about it. The reason they're doing that is because they're trying to create a domino effect. If they get one farmer, they'll be able to get his neighbor, and then from that they'll get his neighbor and his neighbor, and they'll be able to take the land by force. Some people have been able to do this, and then if they've been contested by the government comes in with the police, then they chase them out, and then they have to start all over again. Why? Because people are not addressing the land issue. Nobody wants to talk about it. The whites obviously don't want to talk about it because they fear that they're going to lose their land, the white landowners. The Blacks in the urban areas don't want to talk about it because they don't live in the farms. They don't have any interest of owning land or anything. They're just interested in getting a job, usually in the city where they can make some money. And so nobody is really discussing this in detail. And then that's why it just keeps on going and keeps on going, and people just spread different side of the story that gives different perceptions, and that's not good. So the real story is that, yes, there are farmers that are being killed, but it's part of a bigger land issue. And it's not out of a random attack on them.
I'm guessing like these people that are the perpetrators of these attacks are also the same xenophobic people who commit this atrocities, against foreigners, like Nigerians, especially, where we heard about, a lot of the xenophobic attacks that they had on Nigerians in South Africa. I'm guessing that these are sort of the same people also who have been marginalized, and in a way still are marginalized in South Africa. Am I correct?
You are quite correct. I should say that most South Africans that I meet are not xenophobic. They are actually very accommodating to foreigners and everything. But that's my experience. I've lived in suburbs, in cities, in urban areas, and everything. The xenophobic ones, who are very openly xenophobic, are the poor, the ones in poverty, the Blacks in poverty, who are in squatter camps, who are in townships and everything, who are struggling. They see foreigners coming in, sometimes illegally, sometimes undocumented, and they start up their own businesses. I told you already, usually when foreigners come into South Africa, they have a very strong work ethic. They excel in school, statistically speaking, and they start businesses that grow very fast. Why? Because usually the foreigners that come from other parts of Africa, they're willing to accept very little pay. They're willing to accept lower pay than what the South Africans are accepting. So if the South African businesses are charging 7 rand for bread, they'll charge 5 rand for bread because they don't mind getting less cash as long as they are making a profit. The South Africans obviously cannot compete with that, and so since it causes this problem, and then obviously they bring up the tires, they bring up the sjamboks, which is a type of stick over here, and then they kill them. They killed them brutally in cold blood, and it's pretty terrible. But there is a reason for this, and it really does again come down to the government. The government, first of all, has not manned their borders up there. The most hated, I would say that the most hated South Africans in South Africa are Zimbabweans and Nigerians, but for different reasons. The Zimbabweans is because they're just across the border there. They hop in. There's even a video, a very funny video I saw on YouTube where they were literally just walking in there in right across the border through the fence. What happens is that the guards, the South African guards, are actually accepting bribes from them. They make them pay the South African guards who are there at the border, tell them, pay us and we'll let you through. They've even filmed it. I mean, it's so open now that they know. I mean, there's no way that they're going to enter here without some support from the government. The reason, however, that they hate other types of foreigners, or for different reasons, usually sometimes for crime and things like that. But then the wrong reasons that they hate foreigners is because they feel like they're taking their jobs, which is actually a very big misconception. So foreigners right now in South Africa, if you include all the ones that have been counted in the last census, only make up about 2% of the South African population. I myself am a foreigner, and I don't have South African citizenship. I can leave whenever I have to, but I am here legally, and that's the thing. We were most of us, well, a lot of us anyway. I don't know how many are here legally and everything. But the problem is when there are frustrations from the poor. The government fails them, and they're poor, they're suffering and everything, and they need a scapegoat, whether it be white people, whether it be black people, whichever comes first. And what we've always said is that if they get rid of white people in this country, foreigners are definitely next. If they get rid of foreigners first, white people will likely be next. Because they're all people that can be easily used as scapegoats, and sometimes politicians do use foreigners and white people as scapegoats for the problems of that they themselves are keeping alive for their own incompetence. So yeah, the same ideology basically for farm attacks is also for xenophobia.
I'd like us to touch on two topics, and then we'll conclude the video. And that is in relation to the cities in Africa in which, due to your skin color, you're legally not permitted to live there. And also the recent video that surfaced of an African being denied entry into a mall, I believe. He shared that with me because of the way he was dressed, dressed in traditional attire. So how is it possible that in Africa there are places in which I will not be permitted to live in because of my skin color? Like, this is Africa. Like, how can I be a foreigner in Africa? How is that possible?
So yeah, that is a very it's good that you mentioned it now so that we can kind of get into the nitty-gritty of it. What happens is this. It's a town called Orania, right? That is the one that is the only official town where it's only white people who live there, who live and work there. And the thing is that at face value, when people hear that there's a town where only white people are allowed to live or allowed to work, it sounds incredibly racist and white supremacist-like, right? And especially that it's in Africa. But again, everything has a story behind it, and it does have its context. The story of Orania is actually a very interesting one that pretty much sums up the entire, that a lot of what I've been trying to say in my series. When Europeans arrived in Africa, any African colony, they always knew that whenever they discovered that there were people there, they always knew that they were outnumbered. And different colonies took different stances to kind of try to make sure that they will be successful there, despite being a minority. Some of them tried to genocide the populations. In the DRC, for example, people there was slavery there for they used the natives there to try to harvest rubber for tires because the wheel had just been invented. The car, the automobile had just been invented, and there was a big demand for rubber. So they asked, they needed a lot of it, and a lot of Congolese people died in the process of doing that. In South Africa, however, it was a bit interesting because what happened was they also knew that they were outnumbered and everything, but they did also know that they had the firepower. With the weapons that the Europeans had, that they knew that they were going to be able to subjugate and subdue the natives. What happened when they started to realize that when now we're now in apartheid times, when now during apartheid they realized that some countries are putting pressure on the National Party to tell them to you can't be doing this, you can't segregate 15 million people into one confined part of the country and all that stuff. And the pressure started to come in, and people started to debate these things. And the real debate from the white perspective, the Afrikaner, especially white perspective, was that we cannot give the vote or a democracy in a country where we are outnumbered a few number of times over. There were only about 3 million whites and 15 million blacks. If it's a democracy, it won't be a democracy, it will be a majority rule. So says the white person. So what happened was that that's why they were so against a democracy, including the blacks, because they knew that their vote wouldn't really matter anymore. I mean, even if all 3 million whites voted, it would not compare to the 15 million whites. So over time and everything, when they started to realize that apartheid was going to end, they realized that they were going to now need somehow of a safe haven for whites to go to if things ever get really rough. And so what started to happen when apartheid was starting to come to an end and negotiations started to occur is that Afrikaners started to kind of see the upper parts, the northern parts of South Africa, as a place where they can start to inhabit as their own people, to create a nation for themselves, a country of their own up there in the north, because they did not want to be ruled by the majority, because they feared, I mean, what are they going to do to us, especially that we kept them in apartheid for so long? They're going to probably just massacre us, or they're going to marginalize us completely and all that stuff. And so that's what they tried to do. The Orania, which is the town that we're talking about, was meant to be the starting point. From that town, what they wanted to do was create what they called the Volksstaat, which was going to be an entire, basically, country at some point, where only the Afrikaners, where it would be, for the Afrikaners, run by the Afrikaners with their own government and all that stuff. They advertised it to be a way of keeping their heritage and all that stuff. Fine. Unfortunately, what happened was that they could only get Orania. They wanted to get the Transvaal, but the problem with the Transvaal is that it's quite, valuable to the rest of the country. Orania is a town over there in the semi-desertic part of the country. It's very useless to the government. It's useless to people. No one even wants to really live there. So nobody really cares. So what they did was they did not take any parts of the land that were very valuable, because they knew that the government later on was going to come back and claim it anyway. So they only took Orania. I'm cutting the story short. There are other details, but basically what happened is that from this town that they bought, they didn't actually buy it as a town. They bought it as a community. So for 1.5 million rand, they bought it. And it started out with only 9 people in there. Then it started to grow at some point. Many of the Afrikaners did not support this because they thought it was just a pipe dream. They thought that the best solution was to leave the country completely because the blacks were going to get them. So when now Orania started to grow, the legal matter came into question. Now, what the people do usually not mention whenever they talk about Orania is that actually Orania is 100% legal. The Constitution of South Africa does allow people to self-determination, as they call it. So in other words, you can have an area, if it belongs to you in private property, where you only allow people of a certain culture or religion or even language and stuff. It's in the Constitution. The
Mm.
reason that it's in the Constitution. The thing about it is that the writing of the Constitution and those kind of acts, they came under serious pressure. Both sides, the white side and the black side during Mandela's time, were just trying to find a compromise to quell the fears of both the white and the anger of the blacks. So they had to find some sort of middle ground. So they were like, fine, let them have their own place up there in the north where they, if they want to have a place where only Afrikaners, their own heritage to keep it for themselves, it's fine. Either way, it's just a small portion. No problem. Now, the reality is that Orania does not actually explicitly say that no blacks are allowed to live there. There is actually no rule for that. The rule is that you need to be of Afrikaner heritage. So if for some reason you are Afrikaans and black, which is going to be very interesting, yeah, sure, why not? But in reality, they what they want is segregation. They just want to be separated from the rest of Africa.
I mean, what like are there really Africans, well, indigenous Africans who are also Afrikaners?
They would not be acknowledged by all Afrikaners as being Afrikaner if they're black. But there are some black people who only speak Afrikaans because they grew up around Afrikaners. The colored population as well, that's their language basically. No, not the colored, certain coloreds, and especially the Khoi. But yeah, so in Orania right now, people don't really care. However, in 2017 or 2016, politicians started to make a noise about it. They were like, no, you can't have a town in this day and age where black people are not allowed to walk around, inhabit parts of their own country, completely forgetting what happened in the 90s. And they were trying to bring it down. But up till now, it's still a semi-autonomous place. They have their own even currency. They have their own way of doing things, but they have problems of their own. Most people, you would think that because it was such a good idea for the whites, you would think that most whites would move there, right? There are a number of reasons that they didn't move there. First of all, a lot of whites are doing very well in other parts of the country. They were doing well during apartheid. There's a lot of them are still doing well now. They still have their businesses and everything. They didn't really see a need to move. The other reason is also because it's, again, in a semi-desertic place in the middle of the Northern Cape somewhere, where almost in the Northern Cape. Actually, it's more to the western. But so people are not going to move there. And even the people who live there say that, there are not always jobs. It's a very lonely place. It's just a few people. And they have other problems. Like, for example, I mean, you have a population of 60% men in Orania and 40% women. So try to imagine that in your mind, yeah, man needs some meat. So the thing is that, you're not going to, they do complain that they would like more women to move there because, they need to reproduce. So yeah, that's basically the story. The thing is that it is legal, it is constitutional. They only want it to be that because in the past they wanted to have a place of their own. It failed for a number of reasons. I know that we're running out of time, but it failed to become the big country that they wanted it to be because whites did not move there. Whites did not support it. In the 90s, for example, whites were like, most whites were like, no, we don't support it. We see it as a pipe dream. Today, however, because of all the crime and how the country has gone down the toilet, a recent poll in, I think, 2019 showed that 56% of whites are actually still now supporting the idea of having a homeland for themselves in the north. The thing about it is that they do have to do the work themselves. Most work like garbage disposal, cleaning toilets and stuff is done by blacks in South Africa. That in Orania is done by whites because only whites can live there. Although that's not completely true. They do hire blacks as well if they want to. They have the freedom to hire them. So they do hire some blacks to do some work. But that's how it is.
One of like the issues that I have with that society is like, so they have their own schools and part of the history that they teach, I feel like, is probably a distorted version of history.
Oh yeah.
One thing that I learned is like they don't even speak about Mandela.
Right. They do. Okay, so they have the IEB system, which is the curriculum for the rest of the country, but they also teach their own alternative history. So yeah, they put in the IEB system. Obviously, the curriculum portrays Nelson Mandela as a hero who, among with other people who were part of the struggle, brought the end of apartheid and was the first democratically elected president of South Africa. Their version, however, the conservative Afrikaner version, is that he was a terrorist who, threatened a lot of people. Yes, and they sometimes say this very openly. Even in Lauren Southern referred to Mandela as a terrorist in her documentary. They see him as that. They see him as one. They see apartheid as a system that was good for them because it was good for them. It was basically paradise for them to, have everything set for them. And I've spoken to people who lived in their 50s, now they're in their 50s, who explained to me that really they had everything that they had their whole life planned ahead of them by the National Party. And so they do admit that they do teach the IEB curriculum, but they do teach their own children and everything the facts, the alternative facts or the alternative history that they believe is more accurate. And that includes their own version of how apartheid was. They see it as a good thing. They see that there should be a separation between blacks and whites. I've even heard some of them go so far as to, call blacks non-human. I've heard them say that, there is a difference where even in this day and age, there are still people who believe that, that white people are the chosen, and they're very religious. One thing is also another thing. They are extremely religious. And I'm not saying that because of whatever. They say so themselves. Like you can ask any conservative Afrikaner, they will tell you that their faith is one of the centerpieces of themselves. It's kind of like the Amish community in the United States.
Mm-hmm. I actually was gonna. I made that comparison.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, they actually sometimes compare themselves to the Amish community, where they do not, allow much of outside interaction. They do not. It's a very scary type of thing. I intend on making a series about that. But yeah, they teach them whatever they believe is right, and sometimes it means teaching them that some people are not human, and that that you're on top, you're God's chosen people. I've heard them say that quite a few times, and that the others are the cursed people. So yeah.
So I just lost my train of thought for a second. Oh, I remember now. So like well, first of all, there's 61 people watching. Guys, don't forget to press the thumbs up button. 65 now. Wow. Don't forget to press the thumbs up button. And if you guys are watching this as a replay, you must subscribe to GA Sola. We're gonna be working on a few videos together in the future, hopefully. So I consider myself a Pan-Africanist. And amongst the core values of being a Pan-African is unity. In Africa, of course, you'll find every race really. And so I had this notion that, I had this notion that everyone in Africa, is African, despite of your skin color. So if I go to, for example, if I was born in China, I'm the third generation Chinese. My parents was also born in China, but somehow we still retained our indigenous.
You're still black.
Yeah. We still retained our skin color. If I meet you and I tell you that I am Chinese, there's going to be a question mark there. Even though I'm speaking fluent Mandarin, there's going to be a question mark there. So, like, I wanted to ask, so the Afrikaans population, for example, would you refer to them as Africans?
Right. A very, very good question. And it's a pretty big question also on the land issue. The thing is, as I mentioned once, the the history, the what people consider, what Africans or people who are Black and born in Africa consider the title of being called an African is not just geographical location or where you're born. They, I see someone said no straight up. I'm sure a lot of people agree, but that's the thing. What one thing that we just need to understand is the context. When the in 1652, it was the year 1652. That's centuries ago. That was when the first Dutch settlers arrived and started in South Africa. South Africa. What happened now was that during that entire time, Afrikaners developed their own culture, their own heritage, their own everything. Um, that is completely separate from Europe, or from completely separate from the Dutch system, completely separate from any other European. They are. It's actually the only case in Africa where you have a European whites who literally installed themselves in an African country to live there as their home. Other colonies, for example, in the DRC again, they used Africa as a geographical location as a means for economic prosperity. But it doesn't mean that they were going to live among the people or consider them equals. No, not at all. The Afrikaners, however, they have their own history and so on and so forth. Now, with as Africans, you see, it's not just about no, you're born here, you've been here for a while and everything. There's also a certain amount of what they consider to be culture and and even language and things that make you an African by nature. And when you don't have that, it's a problem. I'll give you an example. In Brazil, you have Black Brazilians, you have Latino Brazilians, you have very light-skinned Brazilians who could pass off as Caucasians over there. But they're all considered Brazilian. They consider themselves Brazilian. Other Brazilians consider them Brazilian. The rest of the world considered Brazilian. And it doesn't matter about their race. They can be Black, they can be white or whatever. But then now, that's the key difference, is that in Brazil, they all speak Portuguese. They all pretty much have the same culture. They influenced them. They integrated themselves into the culture. They live together as equal Brazilians. You understand? In South Africa, they never had that. The Afrikaners always kept themselves separate and always wanted to keep themselves separate from the indigenous people. So if they want to be considered African according to the African definition of what it means to be an African, it would have been a lot different if they integrated themselves with the Black Africans. If, for example, they started speaking the language, if that would have changed a lot. I know that they wouldn't do that, but if they did that, people would. I'm sure even people from other countries would be like, "Oh yeah, no, they're pretty much the same." I mean, they would consider it as in Brazil, because it's just they're white, but they clearly have the same culture. They think the same way we do. They eat the same food we do. They do everything that we do. And that's what, for many people, means to be an African: the culture and the heritage of the indigenous people. The Afrikaners, however, they want to they call themselves Europeanized Africans because of geographical location and because this is what they consider to be their home. So, in a sense, they do call themselves Africans, but they always specify that they're very different from the other indigenous people. And so the short answer to that is that most South Africans, or most Africans in general, would not consider Afrikaners to be African, because they, first of all, it's on their part, it is a bit their own doing, because they never really considered themselves among the people, integrated themselves. And so they may consider themselves African by geographical location, but being African to most Africans is more than that. It's a way of life, I guess. It's a heritage. It's the way that we do things. It's the way that we think, the way that we have a system of Ubuntu, as many Africans consider it. And Afrikaners don't have that. They were just too different. They kept themselves separate. So people will say, well, if you kept yourself separate, why should we consider you African? So no, I don't think until that happens, until something that, for example, happened in Brazil happens, people will never consider them African. This example that you gave with China, however, is also another thing, because the thing is that people, culture and nationalities do sometimes depend on race. America is another exception where it doesn't, because I mean, you can be fully American and you can be black. You can be fully American, you can be white, Hispanic, Chinese, whatever. It's America is almost like an empire at this point. And so those situations do happen. But when it comes to places where the vast majority of people have always been one particular race, like China, or like different countries in Africa, or then there's a problem, because it's like we associate so much with that particular race and that way of doing things, that if you're born here, it doesn't really matter if you were born here, if you've been here for centuries. If you don't do the way that we do, if you're not this the same skin that we are, you will not be considered that, because for so long it's always been considered for one particular race. So I'm just showing both sides. I know that people will most likely say no, and will probably have a very strong opinion on that, because you can also reverse the question. You have French people who are French nationality and they are black, but they will always remind them that, oh yeah, he's black, but originally from Senegal, or he's black, but originally from Nigeria, or it's things like that. Is there really a black European? Does that really exist? If that does not exist, then how can we say that a white African exists? That is basically the question. You can't have it one way and not the other. If you're not going to acknowledge blacks who have been there. I mean, the person who wrote the Three Musketeers, Alexandre Dumas, he was black, and a Frenchman as well. He was, that's how long black people have been in Europe. But still today, there is still, an idea that Europe is white, and Africa is black. So if you're going to have it one way, I would say that the only way to be consistent is to have it both ways. If you are not going to accept that Africans can be European, completely European, then we can't consistently accept that Afrikaners are, even despite of their heritage and their history. But if you can, then I don't see what the problem is, because we cannot be unfair either to the Afrikaners. They have been there. So it depends on what your definition of being an African is, basically.
I see.
I know that was a long answer, but yeah.
Oh no, it was definitely warranted. It was definitely warranted. It helped me to put things into perspective and probably changed a few of my opinions also. So let's talk about this video that we watched that happened yesterday, I believe.
Yeah, it happened yesterday.
Of this gentleman in his native attire pretty much being kicked out of a mall because he was dressed in his African native attire, and he was told that you're not dressed appropriate, like
decently.
Yeah, you're not dressed decent. What's your take on that?
I actually only saw it this morning, and it was a bit surprising for me as well, because you would think that in today's climate, with all these movements that are very pro-black and pro-African, you would think that these things would happen much less. But I made a video about it's entitled "Sellouts," about what here in South Africa people call coconuts. In America, you would call Uncle Toms. People of a race who kind of associate with another race, usually black people associating with whites. And in that particular case, it was an interesting situation, because you will notice that the person who was there, right, who was telling this guy to beat, he was dressed in a very, like, he was in a suit and everything. And I think that he owns the mall. There's very little context, but he said that I own the place, and I'm telling you that you cannot dress like that in my mall. Now, they're saying, the weird part about this, which I really can't get my head around, is that his definition of decent, because he used the word decent, I could not understand that. The man was properly covered up. He was just wearing a traditional outfit. It was so weird, because I would understand. What happens is that there are these Zulu people in the streets sometimes, especially in Pretoria, who, especially little girls, they usually go around asking for money, begging in the streets, but they're always dressed in their Zulu attire. Now, the Zulu attire that they wear is a bit explicit. Like, it's just a little bra here, and it's very explicit. I can understand that because sometimes people do raise a few eyebrows when they see that because they're hardly wearing anything. But this particular guy was in the Bele, and he was dressed up from head to toe,
Yeah, you're
everything.
covered.
Exactly. The guy kind of made it clear he had a problem with the fact that he was in a traditional attire, not because he was dressed decently. I don't know if he doesn't understand the definition of decent, but it was definitely decent in terms of whether it's explicit or not. It was a very strange video, and I cannot bring conclusions as to whether this guy was doing it for whatever reason. And also, the video was a bit short, and we do not know completely, but it was definitely strange, especially nowadays, because you would think that these things would happen, a bit past in the past, but it just proves the reality that there are still divisions, even among Africans. Some people would prefer that we be more European, and they have their arguments. I mean, some of them they bring up arguments that make you really think. Sometimes, they bring up arguments like, what have Africans, if we want to do something that's effective and everything, then let's do it. But until then, we should kind of stick with what has been working, and what has been working has been brought up by the Europeans. And so those are the type of arguments that they bring up, and you can go back and forth with that, but such people do exist. It is a reality in South Africa.
I think that attests to the enormous amount of work that we still have left in front of us in Africa. A lot of things that we need to unlearn, a lot of things that we need to relearn. Because, I mean, that could have not even just only in South Africa. That could have happened anywhere else on the continent.
Oh, yeah. No, I definitely agree. Over here, it's just that, okay, first of all, you should know that South Africa is very different in many ways from the rest of in the past, it was Rhodesia. That was the real breadbasket of Africa. That was the one that was soaring up in development. It was the go-to place in Africa if you want the land of opportunity, basically. When Mugabe and the ZANU PF took power, we know what happened. It kind of went down. So that left South Africa as now the breadbasket and everything. And in comparison to all the other sub-Saharan African countries, they are still the best. Although the best economy is actually Nigeria. It has a better economy than South Africa. But when it comes to the standard of living, when it comes to infrastructure and so on, South Africa is still up there. So I even see it here. And we were talking yesterday about how Africans that move to the United States, where you're at, kind of sometimes look down on the African Americans over there, because they sometimes, one of the reasons that I can imagine, because being in Africa all my life, is because they don't have, they call themselves Africans, but they don't have the way that the true Africans do things. You see, you've gotten soft and everything, but also the other reasons is because of what we discussed, the media portrayal of African Americans always sagging their pants and being indecent in the eyes of the people. And on this side, and also one of the main reasons is because most of Africa is very, very conservative. They value their traditional things very well. America and South Africa tend to be very liberal. And so things, for example, like homosexuality, which is very frowned upon in most African countries and accepted by African Americans, makes it seem that they're not one of us. They've changed. We're different people. The way we think, the way we do things is very different. And so the same thing happens here in South Africa sometimes, because some foreigners that come over here, it's like they're seeing that South Africans are so liberal and they're so accepting of all of these things that we don't accept in the rest of Africa over there. And they look down on them for that, especially also because of religion and stuff. It's like they're unrighteous. And so because of those things, sometimes these sort of occasions happen where Africans turn on other Africans. Humans are just humans at the end of the day.
That video reminded me of a little snippet segment of from a video from one of your series, and it was in regards to this guy. And the guy was mentioning of how if he was president, he will try to take things back to the way it was. And that also reminded me of a comment that I'm going to be responding to in a later video, of where someone says, I wish colonization lasted longer, because maybe then the rest of Africa will be as good as South Africa. First of all, like, who is that guy?
He has his own YouTube channel. He's a Swarthy. Yeah, he's a Swarthy, South African. He just has an American accent, but he's South African. He's Swarthy. Okay, well, Eswatini is actually a sovereign state. It's not really South Africa. They do have differences and stuff, but yeah. But basically, yeah, you should check him out. I'm not going to try to send people out there, but I've seen his stuff, and I'll tell you, he is on the very extreme side of things. It's one of the most extreme things I've ever heard him say. Like, he really insults religions, like, openly and stuff. But
there are a lot of people like that. Yeah. There are a lot of people like that. There are a lot.
Yeah, in my research, when I research things, sometimes I come across things that really make me wonder, about the world. Some things it's like I see it, I'm desensitized to it, but some things stay with me for a day because it makes me really wonder what goes on in people's minds. But yeah, above that, there are people who really do believe that that they themselves are black. Hopefully they know that, unless you're Uncle Ruckus and you think that you have Rivu the Ligo or something. But if they do realize that they're black, and they just consider themselves to be better than the others, and these people are very explicit because they think that no, really, the white race, they really pioneered everything for us and everything, and yes, I'm not undermining the achievements of Europeans and white people. Indeed, it's the only problem in all of this is just what people say with blacks. They tend to think that we are not capable of achieving those things, as in that we'll never be able to. That's the problem.